Welcome to Comic Books and You. Today we are going to cover Isom Ill-Advised Part 2. As I said, I was going to review this once the campaign was over. Rather than giving the covers here, I decided to go with some of the fan art that was submitted to the fan art contest for Isom number 2. Everybody's seen the covers and we've seen them on a few of my videos already, so I decided to go with a few things. The fan art contest was a pretty good success. I've looked at all the pictures quite a few times. They're all pretty good. Of course, some people seem to have a different understanding of the characters before we read the book. That's the problem with these types of fan art contests. Maybe people should have focused on the characters we've known rather than the new characters. But here, we've got Kurt Parker, Matt McAdams, Art Attack X, and Kirsty TH's entries. All of them I found really good and fit into the page that I wanted to use here. You can go look at the various others from the Rippaverse's website. The campaign itself for Isom number 2 was a little bit under my expectation. I was expecting 2.5 million overall sales, so a little bit more than what was the final total. It's not by a big difference, $150,000 under my estimate. That probably means that we're going to see something around 1.8 or so for Alpha Core, and probably the same for Yaira, and for Isom number 3, probably around the same numbers. Then again, I could be proven completely wrong, and I would love to be proven completely wrong in the positive. Or it could happen that things just don't go the way the Rippaverse would want them to go. We'll see in the end. Number of covers sales is pretty high overall, but that also was under my estimate. I was thinking probably something around 40,000 copies sold. Then again, we're fairly close with cover D barely eking 3,000, not even 3,000. Cover C not selling out, and neither cover A or cover B. So all of those are still available in the Rippaverse shop if you're interested in getting any of those covers. In this particular story, Avery becomes Isom once again. He had decided to leave the life behind after a fairly simple tragedy. I was expecting something a little bit more personal to affect him. Now you'll see him in his costume for a good chunk of the comic. It's a new costume from what he originally had. He had some modifications done at the end of the previous issue. The belt that he has is now a utility belt. It just doesn't have any tools in it for now. We are basically told that he is a good man, and we see it through his actions and through how people interact with him. People want to be with Avery and with Isom and want to help him, which shows that they see something in him and that he sees something in them in return. Pretty sure now we can put in that he's got super strength, super agility, super endurance, and probably rapid healing. So all very important and useful thing when you're a superhero, but nothing exceptionally different. It's a standard power set. It's a standard move set. It'll do what it needs to do for a central character in a story. It could have been a little bit more imaginative, but it works. One of the first new character we meet in this is Good Ying, who is basically a private security contractor. He sells security, insurance, medical response, fire extinguishing, criminal investigation, and more, including medical services, specialized medical services, I would say, for as low as in the $49.99 a month. That's a bit high. That's more than a Disney Plus subscription. But still, the basic package gives you all those services in locations where the police, fire department, and other can't easily reach or don't want to go, it kind of works. He's equipped with an high-tech suit that seems to protect him from all sorts of things. Those are always fairly nice. And he's got one of those pop-up helmet that pops on his head when he presses a button. See Paul Chato for complaints. Not that I don't like the concept. I prefer more physical things in many cases. His entire staff seems to be composed of robots, drones, and other machines, which is good in that line of business and that line of work because you're the only one really risking your life while the rest of your team is just robots. And you don't have to pay for the health insurance of your machines. and you do have to pay for maintenance on them. Not sure which one is the most relevant here. Who knows? We haven't seen, his entire staff and his entire team, but he's an interesting character and one of those characters that I would like to see more of overall, because it's an interesting concept to have literally a hero for hire. We're also introduced to Bloodruth, who's a mysterious witch who uses blood and fire magic along with controlling spirit animals. Well, the animals are physical, they're not really spirit animal, but they're smarter and more powerful than normal animal of their kind. He lives in a remote region in Texas in an actual castle, because why not? I mean, if you're gonna go full magic user, just either that or a giant tower, one of the two. She seems to have a fairly good relationship with Goodying and trusts him enough to help Isom through his recommendation. And she doesn't seem to like our resident bad guys, the aliens, a whole lot. Speaking of aliens, well, those are our evil demon thingies that we've seen on cover B and in a few other places in some art that our friend Eric July leaked online. They seem to be coming from another world, which seems to be L or close to hell. Not quite sure yet what this whole thing entails. They do seem to be sentient to a degree, but they don't communicate all that well. The two that we have here say a few words to Avery, but that's about it. Maybe it's one of those I've mind kind of deal. Maybe they're just sentient enough to be able to follow orders and do the biddings of stronger beings. They're covered in fur. They've got small horns on their head. They've got tusks that seem to be built into their skull. They've got fire red vein-like things throughout their body. They control fire. They're physically really strong, but not as strong as our main character. So they're nasty grunt type enemies, more or less. Very strong in large groups. Alone, probably not much of a threat to a full-blown superhero. I do like the design, but I do find it a little bit simple. It's not super imaginative, but it works for a grunt type villain. We do see a special format alien at the end of the book. I don't have a picture for it because you need to read the book to see it, I think. It's a little bit different, a little bit more imaginative, but even there, it's not as fancy as I sometimes would like some of my monsters to be, especially when dealing with supernatural, the really extreme supernatural. Our story begins as Avery's sister is walking into her office discussing with mergers and acquisitions with a colleague. Unfortunately, that's the thing that you see a lot in comics these days. Whenever you're dealing with business people, that's always what they're talking about. I don't know, it just seems a little bit cliche nowadays. But once she walks into her office, she is confronted by Darren Fontano, who's not too happy that she basically sicked her brother after him. After a few threats and a little bit of casual workplace violence, Projex's founder and the boss of the place, Lincoln Osobio, breaks things up and has a casual chat with Darren, which absolutely doesn't revolve or implies any threats of violence either. After this, we get a flashback pointing to the time where Avery decided to stop being Isom as he was fighting the monster Chadron, who was basically murdered a cosplay chick in front of his eyes as he was trying to rescue her and some random fanboy. Like I said, I thought this would be a little bit more personal for the reason why Isom stopped the superhero job. It does work overall, just seems a little bit odd in my opinion. This was basically all part of a psych session with the costume designer who basically gets Avery to agree to never quit again and telling him that the costume would be ready with a few upgrades within the next few days. Avery goes back home, goes back to his ranch, tries to contact his partner and security manager Sam, who doesn't seem to respond. He gets to the security house. The door is left open, which Avery told Sam multiple times not to do because it lets all the bugs in. But once he gets in, the bugs that he meets are rather large, furry, and a bit fiery. He kind of gets into it with the two aliens that are here and gets fairly injured. He gets hit on the shoulder. It both pierces the skin and damages the shoulder, but also burns him at the same time. And our resident aliens basically start a fire and burn the whole place down. Avery's crew and other ranchers show up to help him and to try to turn the fire down. But Gooding also gets on scene fairly quickly to start the recovery and fire extinguishing process. Gooding does give Avery a few details as part of his contract as to what might have happened, provides him a little bit treatment free of charge for the injury, and lets Avery go. After all the excitement, Avery tries to get some rest at his house, but he gets a call from his sister telling him that Darren came to her office, which kinda messes up his resting plans and makes him a little bit irate. In Darren's offices, Darren is basically directing traffic with a bounty he put on Avery's head and trying to get everything under control. He tries to get some information off Santwan, but Santwan basically tells him, "You're not paying me for getting you information, you're paying me to be muscle." And Darren simply fires him. I don't think that was his brightest move, and I have a feeling that what you see here is where Darren's entire industry and business is going to go down the drain. Later in the evening, after a wrestling promo that goes off the script, Peritext leader goes for a drive with a business associate, which actually sold him out to Darren, trying to get him to get shut up in the car. Sadly for him, Lincoln basically forces the car to crash, and he bursts through the windshield after declaring that he wouldn't die that night. Next morning, Avery decides to take a trip to Gooding's compound, grabbing a pistol on the way, and he also meets Sam's wife, possibly widow, on the way out, and he decides to take her with him. They take a robot ride to the main building at Gooding's, and Avery tries to get information as to what attacked them. The PSC doesn't really know all the details, but he does say that he knows someone who would have more information, giving Avery a little card to introduce him to the appropriate person. Avery takes a few days for his costume to come in, though he takes that time to rest and do a bit of exercise. And once he receives it, he suits up, gets in his pickup truck, and drives to the undisclosed location, busting open a gate on the way. Of course, Isom didn't quite expect to actually be seeing a full-on fairy tale castle when he gets there. And he also gets attacked by a variety of wild animals, two fairly massive wolves, or big dogs. The coloring would indicate dogs more than wolves. There are also a few crocodiles, an evil crow, and an actual wyvern. Not sure, maybe in Isom's world, wyverns are a common occurrence. That's the thing with comic, every once in a while, it might seem supernatural, but maybe in this world it isn't. We'll go with that. Bloodruth does stop the animals from attacking him and introduces herself in a fairly heavy-handed manner. Isom gives her the letter of reference, or the little card he got from Gooding, and she kind of explained to him what the aliens sort of are and where they sort of are from her understanding, and she tells him that they have a hideout nearby in some mountains. Bloodruth goes on her way on her wyvern, and Isom decides to, catch a ride, literally, by grabbing the leg, and they get to the mountain in question, which is apparently a colony of the nasty beasties we've seen earlier. Unlike earlier, Isom is ready to fight there, and he does give a much better performance overall. Isom and Bloodruth fight their way through the first group before getting to the main chamber, which is jam-packed with the creatures, and Isom decides to basically cause a commotion as Bloodruth attempts to rescue any human survivors. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I don't know which one you want to go with there, seems that Sam is the only one that is still alive in the larder. That might be what it is, where the aliens kept them. And she used what little magic she has left at that point to helps Sam to escape. All the while, Isom keeps on fighting and beating up a horde of fire demons. The two of them start fleeing after Isom tells them to just run. One of the aliens grab him and decides to basically self-destruct. Isom survives the detonation and starts fleeing. And this is how our story ends. As far as the book goes, it is pretty long. Overall, this is almost, 5 regular floppies in length, but it doesn't feel that long once you go through it. And it's a pretty fun read overall, in my opinion. Now let's look at the covers a little bit. I mean, we've discussed them quite a few times already, so we're not going to go in depth here on it, but we are going to talk about some of the issues with having multiple covers like these and things associated with this. Having 4 covers overall, I think, is a really large number for something that is basically being sold as a graphic novel. I understand you want multiple cover because collectors are going to want to buy all of them, but I'm not a fan of this at all as far as being a reader of comics. The idea is you want your book to have the widest possible distribution, so the most number of fans are going to be able to read it. The collectors and the people buying the book to resell them at a later date should not be your primary market, because if you do that, you're falling in the same kind of trap the mainstream industry is getting into. Of the 3 limited covers, I still think cover B is the best one of the lot and is the one that I would be using on a hardcover or made to order or something of the sort. If it was, let's say, if you just sold through online sales, this would be a perfect cover. It has all the necessary elements of a strong brand. It has your characters. It has your villains. It's an action piece. It works perfectly well. Your cover A, on the other hand, is great for a store variant, something that you would put in stores for people to be attracted to it, to grab it from the rack, or to grab it from bookshelves. Each of them have their own reason to be. Cover C is the weakest of them all. Honestly, it's just Isom punching through a wall. It's really not that interesting. And it has that ludicrous price tag associated with it. At $100, even if there's only 5,000 of them, it is definitely not something that a reader would enjoy. This is something a collector might want to get. Someone who wants to read the book, someone who wants to get in the story, and someone will keep buying your books. This is a very, very bad cover. Another thing, if you have to make a video to try and entice people to buy this particular overpriced cover, there's an issue. Okay, the covers should sell themselves. You shouldn't have to add anything extra or have to do special marketing for a particular cover. Cover D, the permanent evergreen cover, is perfectly functional and does what it's supposed to do, but honestly, it's not necessary. Cover A and cover B do the same and do it better. The best thing to do here is to give us less covers. If you really respect your fans, this is the best thing to do. Go down to 1 or 2 covers. Everybody can buy 2 books if they need to collect them or if they want them. It allows more flexibility and you spend less money on, printing extra books and paying an artist to do those extra covers. You have to think of it this way. In the end, this particular campaign did not sell the maximum number of books that were created. For cover A, cover B, cover C, and cover D barely started making sales. So was it really necessary to have all of those covers? That is a question that will probably never get answered because nobody wants to answer it, but the question needs to be put out there. As far as the actual book, this basically makes anything Marvel, DC, Image, and almost all indie comics look amateurish. The quality of the paper, the quality of the cover, the quality of the binding, everything is at least 1 or 2 steps up from at least what DC normally does. And if you look at what, let's say, most of Whatnot puts out as an example, True Scout Comics and Massive and things like that, the paper quality is about the same, but the cover is much better, the binding is much better, everything around it is much better. So this is a book that will actually keep, even if you go through it quite a few times. Even the packaging this is shipped in is top of the line. Perfectly protects the books, perfectly protects everything that you have. You get high quality poly bags, and high quality board. Everything this comes with is top of the line. I also ordered a Bloodruth poster just to finish my collection. And the packaging for all the posters the Rippaverse ship out is also top of the line. The only ad we get in this is the ad for Gooding Services. We don't get an ad for Eric July's Wife Jewelry Store or anything that potentially could have been put in there. I honestly don't mind a small number of ads in books, especially if they're revenue generating. I mean, we discussed them at length in other videos. Here, it's really an in-universe ad. It actually adds to the realism of the whole story. It's really an interesting thing to have in there. Speaking of the art here in this book, it's generally pretty much top-notch. We see progression in what the art we've got here. The artist knows a little bit more how to draw the characters, how to draw the situations based on what's going on. And even the robot there is actually pretty cool. So overall, I think Gabe is doing a really good job on this. I've had a few people in various videos and online saying that the art wasn't very good and that it should have been done by someone else. I'm not sure what they meant by this. In the end, you hire who you can hire, especially if the talent is there. And I've never had any issues with Gabe's style in any of the books. We get a lot more action in this book than in Ill-Advised Part 1, which had a few fight scenes and a few nice action parts. But this one here, the last third of the book, is generally just an all-out brawl with Isom, Bloodruth, the aliens, and it's overall really well done. As you can see here, we've got no dialogue, and in another action panel, we've got no dialogue. That's really good overall. What happens too often with these kinds of books is that you get dialogue and things in those action panels which break the immersion and detract your attention from what you actually want to see, which is your characters fighting, your characters interacting with each other, etc. So this is really good in my opinion as far as how those action scenes are depicted. The fight with Chadron is also pretty good overall. It's a bit shorter, but one of the things we have in there is a lot of the blows and a lot of the fighting feels very heavy. We see Isom giving everything he's got to fight a creature that's about twice his height and twice his width, and he's not a small man. This is a complaint that we had quite a few times from various people in Ill-Advised Part 1, that there was no impact in the fight against Santwan. Here, we do have that. So it's more interesting, maybe in a way. I didn't mind the action scenes in Ill-Advised Part 1, but here there is more of an impact, not only physically, but with what we actually see. Backgrounds are consistent throughout the issue, nothing mind-shatteringly good, nothing horribly bad. There's no repetitive backgrounds. There's no boring backgrounds that are simple gradients, unicolor, or just shading. All the backgrounds we have here are great. The background characters we see in various panels, like in this wrestling promo, are all detailed enough for what we want to have. So this is a perfectly functional type of background. I'm not going to praise it any more than that, but for a longer book like this, it works fairly well. The animals we get are all really good in general. They look natural. You have that feeling of fur on those wolves/dog. I honestly can't tell here what the author and the artist wanted to depict here. The coloring would tell me that those are dogs, because wolves have particular coloring on them. Black wolves kind of do exist, but they're not frequent, and they can't be wild dogs in that particular size. This is just a case of it's a little bit weird, but they're a mystical creature. Same with the dragon/wyvern/flying beastie. It doesn't have a stinger at the end of its tail, so I'm pretty sure it's just one of those four-limbless dragon. Unfortunately, it's a style that we see way too often nowadays and is not as fun as the full-blown quad-limbed plus 2 wings dragon. You have crocodiles or alligators. Those are not the best. Maybe it's not the best picture I've taken of them either. And I'm not sure if they're crocodile or alligators. I can't go up to them and ask them, see you later, and see if they reply with the alligator. But they work for what they're supposed to be. All of those beasties do what they're supposed to do. We don't see Santwan very long in this particular issue, and he seems less menacing and impressive in this particular book than he was in the previous one. Someone did bring up that this is more than likely because in this particular interaction he has with Darren, he is the smaller of the two men. Darren is the bigger man due to the fact that he has the money, he has the power, he has the ability to fire him on sight, which is what ends up happening. Santwan doesn't feel as big here because he is not as big in the end in this particular interaction. There's a few things I have issues with, one of which is the car crash scene with Lincoln being thrown out of the car. The mechanical designs we have in this are all pretty straightforward, workable, but nothing imaginative or fantastic. I mean, Isom's pickup is just that. It's a pickup truck. It doesn't have anything special or unusual about it. But when we have this particular scene of the car crash, unfortunately, it kind of irks me because it is not what it's supposed to be, not what it's supposed to look like. If you give me a second, so I'm going to show you here some car crashes at different speed. 50 kilometers an hour, which is about 30 miles an hour, 60 kilometers per hour. You'll notice the first thing you actually do notice here is the crumpling at the front of the vehicle. Whatever era your car is going to be in, with the kind of speed and impact you get, the force here equals the mass times acceleration. The car is very heavy, and the acceleration, well, that's part of your speed here. So whatever happens, if your car is lifting off the ground as much as it is in the panel here, we would have significant crumpling at the front of the car itself. Even if it's an armored car, the mass would be higher, so the force would be higher as well. This here, I think it irks me because of my knowledge of, basically. And it's a thing that can be improved in the future. Another thing that's a problem is the cover A versus interior art for Chadron. Chadron is very different when you look at the interior art compared to the cover for cover A. Different number of digits, whatever people are saying, Chadron doesn't have the right number of digits on the cover compared to the interior art. He doesn't look as menacing in the interior as with the cover art as well. And that's going to keep being an issue as long as the interior artist is not the one doing your covers. This is an issue that we have with American comics all the time. It's a side effect of something we already spoke in this video, the fact that there's too many covers. Maybe quality control or art control could have fixed this issue, or maybe we simply could have gone with fewer covers or used the same artist for the cover of your book as you do with your interiors, like they do with manga, like they do with French comics. I'm not sure why American comics get a pass on false advertising for this. For the story elements, we're going to start with something we discussed when we looked at the first book, which is the contrast between Avery and Darren. Both of them have similar motivation, wanting respect, but the way they achieve that is quite different, and we see more examples of this in this particular story. Avery is ready to do everything to rescue one of his employees, on top of wanting to rescue a friend of the family. Basically, he's by all account a great boss, the kind of person you would want to be around, and he will respect you if you respect him. And if you respect him, you will also get his all when you need when you need some help. On the other hand, Darren only really has respect because he's got money. If he didn't have his money and his club, probably wouldn't be able to command any form of respect from anyone. because all he does is discard people as soon as they don't obey or serve him, and he gets into all sorts of issues because he sees himself being disrespected when people are trying to, discuss things with him. I'm not sure which one of the two will have a brighter future ahead of him. Another thing you can think of in the same vein here is Lincoln Eusebio, the founder of Projexus, also seems to be showing signs of being a great boss. Another person who will help you out if you're an employee or if you're someone working with him or for him. But if you disrespect him, he will take action in order to remove you. So you can see that that is a ongoing theme in this particular book. When I did my review for Isom #1, I said that we could basically take out the supernatural elements and you'd still have a fairly consistent story if you have the reading ability of a 5th grader or more. Ill-Advised Part 2, however, really goes all in on superpowers and the supernatural. Here you wouldn't be able to excise the supernatural. It's built into the story in a much more in-depth manner. So we do go from something that was more of a polar detective story into a full-on action-adventure story. Here we have the famous panel of Isom ripping open a barrier to get into Bloodroot's region or territory, literally crossing the first threshold, as Campbell would say in the hero's journey. It has all the subtlety of getting punched in the face by Isom, but it works really well, and it does show the change from where the supernatural was there but still muted into full-on supernatural adventure. You can tell that as well from other things that happen in the book. When Avery goes and visit Goodying, he grabs a handgun before going. He doesn't trust his superpowers. He doesn't trust his special abilities. He's taking, insurance with him. Even when he goes to fight a bunch of demon-looking dudes, doesn't even bring a baseball bat. He goes all out with punches, kicks, punts. Nothing fancy, but it works really well. Another thing that you can tell going through the story, really the first 2/3 of the book or so, where the supernatural is more muted, we refer to our hero as Avery. Once we go through that threshold, he's Isom again. Once again, not super subtle, but it works really well, and it does enforce the idea that we are dealing with the supernatural in superheroes going forward. We have a few glimpses into Eric July's personal ideologies in this book, and they're fairly hard to miss if you've ever listened to any of his podcasts or any of his discussions. Goodying is basically the libertarian ideal for private security, where you pay what you're willing to pay to get security, rather than having to pay taxes for it. Even though that's the case, I don't see the cops or the law in itself being denigrated anywhere in this book. Alpha Corps exists as police, and we see them fairly quickly in this book in a short scene that I did not review here because it's not important to the story itself. Another thing that you have is a cosplay girl that gets killed by Chadran. Doesn't seem to know the character she's actually cosplaying as. It's a minor thing in the book. It doesn't affect anything, but if you listen to Eric July on a few of his shows, you'll see that it's a fairly major gripe that he has about a part of the fandom. The fun thing here is really that it's not pushing an ideology, like some people might think. There's just element of the story which reflects the creator and reflects where our characters are living. Texas is far more libertarian than some of the other states in the Union. And if we compare it to Canada, it's night and day. Unless we start seeing no roads and people throwing each other tactical recreational nukes, I think we'll be fine. We don't have any real politics in this book. A bit like Ill-Advised 1, we get more than just the story in this book, but I think it's better presented in this one. We have a small excerpt with the Alpha Corps doing Alpha Corps-y things. We get that weird wrestling promo, which seems to be going far deeper than it should. But all of those elements are more or less integrated in the story in a far better way than those side events or those side shows were introduced in Isom Ill-Advised 1. So we do see that there is progression into how our author is improving overall, I guess. We do have some of the threads that were put down in part 1, which pay off in a big way here with Sam disappearing and being kidnapped in part 1. And now we see how that ends up in this one. The pace here is not breakneck. We've had a lot of books recently that I've reviewed where the pace seemed very, very rushed. But that's an hard way of saying it, because in a lot of those books, it's not that it's rushed, it's that you have a fairly limited number of pages and you use them as best you can. Here we have a book that's 100 plus pages. It doesn't follow the floppy format. It's not a trade paperback. It's an actual book comprised of a single part of the story, and it works really well at that. Once again, this reminds me far more of French bande dessinée than any form of American comics or manga. In bande dessinée, however, this probably, up to the point where we're at, we'd probably have 4 books, just because of the number of pages and the formatting, and it would probably need to be paced fairly differently just because of the number of pages. For the flashback section, I probably would have used a different color background or different format for the panels and the boxes, just to indicate that it's really a flashback. Most of us would know and understand that it's a flashback, but we have to realize that some people criticizing this book have basically 3rd grade reading abilities and will go after it for every single slights that they might believe is there. It's just a thing that's fairly common in manga, fairly common in French comic as well. It's not used as well in American comics. It's just a thing that we need to think of. The first portion of the book is really a bit of action mixed with important exposition that really sets up the universe and sets up our characters, but it doesn't feel slow or tired, and we're not faced with the horrible exposition dumps like we have in some other comics. The end bit is just a massive action set piece, and that's great for what we have here. It really drives the point forward and sets the tone for things to come. Isom number 3 will have a lot of things to do if it's really the end of the Ill-Advised arc. I can't wait to see what really happens there. Throughout this book, we can see the evolution of Eric July as an author. All the while, we're following our hero's journey, basically going through the hero's journey. The rippaverse code of ethic in constant contact with their customers and fans is a big advantage compared to major publishers. And the fact that they have very good work ethic and speed and fulfillment sets them apart from a lot of independent creators. There's things that I've put up in this review where I feel that sometimes this code of ethics is being moved aside a little bit. There's things that probably need to be discussed. But overall, I think Rippaverse is doing what independent comics should be doing. Got 2 other book series already announced with Yaira and Alpha Core. There's another book in production that is about a mysterious character. Not sure if it's going to be from an existing character we've already seen or someone brand new that Chuck Dixon is working on. We've got Ill-Advised Part 3 coming in the near future as well. The Rippaverse is going in the right direction as a publisher and as a production company. But they do need to be careful not to fall in the early image trap of believing their own hype and believing that they can do no wrong. As with Isom number 1, this book is a strong recommend for me. And hopefully the upcoming books will be the same. If you haven't gotten them yet, you no longer have the opportunity of getting a nice 2-pack for Isom 1 and Isom 2. Who knows what's going to happen when Isom 3 it's the books. We'll see how that goes. So, at this point, I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. Remember to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell, tap dance a little bit. Do what needs to be done. Keep on reading comics. Keep on enjoying them. I'll keep analyzing them, and I'll see you guys later. Bye-bye.